first person that I would like to introduce is Cecilia Testart. Is she here? Sweet, there she is all the way in the back. So Cecilia will be presenting Removing Barriers to RPKI Adoption. Cecilia is, and I really want you guys to listen to this, okay? A PhD candidate in electrical engineering and computer science at MIT. Raise your hand if you think you're smarter than Cecilia in this room. Okay. She's working with David D. Clark there. Her work was awarded with a Distinguished Paper Award at the ACM Internet Measurement Conference in 2019. Welcome to NANOG, Cecilia. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. I don't know if this is working. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, so actually that was my past self. I presented at NANOG and I had submitted that presentation right before COVID hit, so I only presented virtual while I was a PhD student. I, in between graduating from MIT, I'm now a professor at Georgia Tech. I've been there for 3 years where I've set up my lab, where we really care about trying to support internet security and reliability. And we've been working all this year looking at routing security, and in particular to research public key infrastructure or RPKI adoption and its integration with routing and network operation. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So, green button, thank you. And this work is in collaboration with Josephine Wolf from Tufts University, Romain Fontuing from IIJ in Japan, and lead by my PhD student, Deepak Gouda. So currently, there is consensus on the benefits of RPKI. So what I'm showing you here are blog posts and press releases from most of it industry, so hopefully some people here in this room has written these things, where you have measured from your perspective the benefits that RPKI brings to the security and reliability of the routing system in terms of preventing traffic during incidents, preventing the spread of misconfigurations and potentially malicious routes in BGP. And you can also see some screenshots of government supporting RPKI, even here in the US, the FCC doing a call for a notice of inquiry for RPKI, to support RPKI adoption. And also you have there the Dutch government. Now, if we look from the measurement perspective, the adoption of these route origin authorization certificates, where organizations that hold address space can declare the number of the autonomous system that can route that address space in BGP, has steadily increased over the years, though we do see some, actually some stalling in the past year, especially in IPv6. But even in IPv4, early last year, if we look at the amount of address space globally routed, it passed the barrier of 50% adoption of, in terms of size of the address space. So what I'm concerned about and what has driven my recent research is the question of, okay, so now we've established there are benefits and this seems to be a mature technology, we know how to do it, then that piece of adoption should be a quick no-brainer. Well, turns out it's not. And I spent some time trying to figure out how to support the adoption for that piece. So the research question I have driven this is really how can we support RPKI to reach high levels of adoption, almost full adoption? What are the barriers to doing so? How can we pass those barriers and what has been successful in doing that? And then with that, how can we target efforts to really support and encourage the adoption to reach higher levels of RPKI adoption? So I have driven, leading 2 projects on this, one on really qualitative methods where I've interviewed with Josephine network operators, some of which may or may not be in the room, so I thank you for your time. And we have delved in a set of questions of how has the decision-making and the adoption journey be for different operators. And I'm pairing that with now, instead of small number, really internet-wide measurement of the state of RPKI in the internet using routing data, quiz data, IP delegation, and RIR-specific data. Because yes, RPKI depends on the RIRs, and each RIR has independently set up their system, so they're slightly different, and there are differences in how the RIR approach RPKI. I've been framing this from the technology adoption perspective. So if we would put all the organizations that hold internet together, we could say that now with RPKI, within the late majority phase, because we've passed the 50% adoption. But what is really key in how we understand this framework is actually the population, and that we need to grab a population that's relatively homogeneous to have these processes. And as you expect, the amount of organizations that globally hold address space in the internet is not homogeneous. So it turns out that that piece that we're missing is mostly from population of organizations that have a set of characteristics that make them not to be in this late majority phase, but sometimes even in more or less early adoption phase or less than that. So from the measurement perspective, we can very quickly see when we take the address space and try to link it to the organization that needs to issue these RPKI records, that the adoption really varies by region and countries in the world. The regions and countries that have really, really high levels of adoption, others that are definitely lagging behind. It also depends a lot on the size of the organization when we look at it by the amount of address space that that organization holds, and how that relates to then the size of the team that is probably managing those resources. Also, the type of organization that holds those resources, and here a key thing that we have found is whether or not the business model and the activity of this organization is related to the internet or not. And finally, we have also found that there are pieces of address space for which the adoption of RPKI is more challenging or slow because of historical delegations and complexity in the delegation trees that requires big coordination efforts. So we can look at it really from the measurement perspective, but we wanted to look a little bit more at why. Why is it that there's this distinction by region, by size, with the expectation that this will help us understand how we can support RPKI adoption. So with the interviews and pair that with extensive measurement, we have found 4 key areas that are really critical for RPKI adoption. The first one is the link to the IP resource management. And it's really here, all of the challenges that relate to managing IP, documenting IP, figuring out who owns what IP, all of them inherited by RPKI. Also, as a new technology, you may expect that awareness and training is relevant. And I can say, of course, we knew from the start that this was relevant, but it's much more relevant, much more pervasive, the need that organizations feel of awareness and training that we believe when we started the study. Finally, we also saw that really the tools that are available to manage and issue the RPKI records and the ease of use of those tools and integrating them in the process from the organizations plays a role in RPKI adoption. And finally, the tools for routing, monitoring, incident investigation also play a role in RPKI adoption, because many organizations, until they can feel that they have the visibility to figure out if something went wrong with their RPKI records, they are not gonna adopt RPKI until they know that they can find that, or that if there is an incident and somehow this incident could have some interaction with the RPKI records, they will be able to figure that out and see. And until those tools sometimes are developed in-house, which takes time, are ready and set up in a place where the organization feels confident that it's going to have the information it needs to react, they don't adopt RPKI. So this also has a very big impact. So in the interest of time, I'm going to show you a little bit of the quotes that are representative from this thing from operators for the 2 first one. And here, this is a person from a relatively large organization that, and it's not the only one, but this is on the theme of, because of these years and years of IP allocation and poor record keeping, now figuring out what are, for what pieces of address space they are the ones that need to issue RPKI records, or is another organization that needs to issue RPKI records is a challenge. And this is also a challenge for small organizations. So what we have found is that if we go to the very, very small organization, sometimes they're routing one prefix, /24. But it turns out that their delegation is actually more than that /24. And they had no idea, just because whoever is now in that organization took the information that they were routing that /24, and they didn't even know that they had more address space. And even when they know the address space that they have, then they completely lost the credentials or the records of how to even regain those credentials. And the process of even declaring inside the organization that the organization needs to go through recovering the credentials with the RIRs to be able to issue RPKI takes time and economic resources, because you need to pay to recover your credentials. So this really has prevented RPKI adoption in many cases, or at least made it slower. And also, just to give you an example of how pervasive the need is for training, we got many feedback and quotes of the challenge of really training about RPKI. And here in the room, I expect that most of you are network experts. And it turns out that even for network experts, RPKI is kind of a different thing that is coming, and it requires training. And the fact that you have been doing networking for many years, it doesn't directly correlate that you're able to figure out how to issue the RPKI records in the way that works with the routing of your organization. So even already within the networking experts, we see that there's still this need for more training. Now, on top of that, we heard again and again in our interviews that that's not the only training that is needed. A lot of the networking teams that were kind of driving this in the organization, those people were also in charge of training other parts of their organization. Like in this quote, that this person was spending a lot of time doing presentation to upper management. That happens a lot, where the networking team needs to be presenting, because sometimes even if the C-suite heard about RPKI, then they don't fully understand. And to enable them to really adopt RPKI, there needs to be this training upper management. And in many organizations, not only upper management, but other units of the organization. For example, it could be that there is a networking team, but then there is a customer-facing IP team that then they need to coordinate to know what records to issue. And then for that to happen, there's need to be training for that team. And even in other organizations, it could be that there is a third team that is involved, because it's a third team that oversees everything that is security, and it would be the team that eventually either sets up a repository with the RPKI records. So that team gets involved, and now we have like multiple teams of one organization that needs to get involved for this to happen. And usually it is the job of the networking team to actually train all these other teams and train management so that they can make a decision, and that takes a lot of time and resources. The other thing that we've discovered in this list and through the interviews of people that have resources in different RIRs is that it turns out that for each of these four key areas, the RIRs can really play a key role. Oh, by the way, and I missed one I missed this one that is really good. So even like, this is also for the smaller organizations. So awareness is not only within the organization, within the experts, it's also the organizations that don't know anything about this is happening. It turns out there's many organizations that hold address space in there. And there's this beautiful quote about how do you teach about NaNoG to the people that don't know about NaNoG. And all of these organizations are so away from networking, but that they hold address space, and it would be up to them to issue the RPKI records. How do we reach them? We need new channels compared to what is going on right now. And even for that, what we've realized through these interviews is that the RIRs can play a key role in this. And because the RIRs started doing this independently, we can really see the regions moving differently in these different areas because of the decision of the RPKI. And just to give you an example, for instance, I'm originally from Chile, and in LACNIC, if you request a piece of IP right now, by default, unless you request that not to happen, they ask you what is the AS that would be routing that address space, and you would be issued your ROA immediately. So there's our places where the decisions that the RIRs play and how they like the tools that they provide for resource management, for training and awareness, and how they interact with different parts of the industries or even different industries in their regions really has an impact in RPKI adoption. And now, well, if you want to read more quotes about this frame into the challenges and then also looking at how organizations have gone through this, I invite you to read our paper. We put many more quotes in there. And I'd like to switch a little bit of gears to just show you how actually issuing these records can be complicated. So here I have an example that I took from a prefix that is being announced by Cox Communication. So now I'm based in Atlanta, so I took something local. And this prefix is not covered by RPKI. Let's say we try to cover this prefix by RPKI. We first need to figure out what is the organization that holds that assignment. And that's the one that can issue ROAs. So it turns out it is Colocation America Corporation. Now, given how RPKI works, we need to look at, because this is a /21 in IPv4, if there are sub-prefixes that are routed from this. And when we look at the routing tables, we can find, it turns out that there are 7/24 from this /21 that are routed with different origins. And again, because of how RPKI works, that means that 7 different ROA certificates, at least 7 different ROA certificates are needed, in this case, to prevent issues with availability once figuring this out. And then, because these depends on the routing decisions, let's take a look at who holds those sub-prefixes. And there's indeed, in this case, other organizations involved. One of the organizations that holds one of those sub-delegations is called Internet Utilities. So here you can see that you have a case where there is coordination required between these at least 2 organizations, and there needs to be a planning to prevent getting prefixes that are not being routed. So every time that we were talking to operators, it felt that they needed to rethink about what would be a nice process for the operators to figure out that they are issuing these certificates the right way without causing problems in how things are routed. And because of that, we got this idea of really figuring out a framework that would include what are the type of questions and the type of information that is needed to issue this route origin authorization in a way that matches with the routing intention of the different organization. And through some back and forth with network operators and even reaching out with either experts in the RIR system or the RIR themselves, we came out with this framework that has steps and questions of what is the information that should be considered, and I'd say the minimum information, because there could be some very complex cases, to issue the ROAs. And as you can see, most of the steps in this framework, even though in the interest of time I'm not going to go through it, end by a question mark. And that means that we need data to answer the question for the framework. So there, because I'm a measurement folk, what we did is that we started putting together the data set that would allow for the organizations to answer these questions. And we actually made it publicly available through a web interface that we call the ru-RPKI-ready. And the whole process to gather all this data, to clean it up, put it together, and what we can learn from RPKI from this process, we published it in the Internet Measurement Conference in a paper that was presented just a few months ago. And this system is now publicly available. You can access it. And in here, you can put a prefix. And when you search, we're going to put it together, all the information that we can find about that prefix from routing, whois records, RPKI delegation tree, and the certificates that we find. And here's the example of this prefix that is originated by Cox. So we put in there the origin AS, but that the organization that has the key or holds the key in the management system to issue the RPKI certificate, it's called Colocation America Corporation. We also have the information about the routed sub-prefixes at the bottom, and also of the name of the organization that has received sub-delegation to ease the process of coordination. And then if you click on the button of recommend ROAs, what we do is that based on that information, we recommend that this should be the minimum amount of ROAs that should be issued so that the routing intentions that we can see in BGP, they are represented in RPKI. And we put them in an order so that we start by the most specific prefixes. That way, if these organizations were to decide to deploy these in order, the last one to be deployed would be the covering /21, and that would prevent to have problems of availability with the most specific prefixes. So based on feedback that we got actually from network operators, on top of publishing this, you can also search in our database with the origin AS. So we know that the origin AS is not necessarily the same organization that, that holds the delegation of the address space. But here you can look for the origin AS. In this case, I'm still continuing with Cox. And we're also providing statistic of how our, the prefixes, that whatever the originator is covered. And you can see that Cox has a very good coverage of RPKI. And at the bottom, you can see the list of the prefixes with all of their information for RPKI certificates. And you can then order that by RPKI status. And you can see now we found some of the prefixes that are originated by Cox that don't have a route origin authorization covering them. So I picked one of those, this one that is from City of Tulsa. And I looked at the information that we have available on the platform. And here it provides the type of information to be able to issue the certificate. But here you can see that there is no identifier of the certificate. This means that, that there is no organization that currently holds the key that would enable to issue a certificate for this prefix. And then you can also see here that these, we report the status of the allocation. This is an allocation, which means because this is ERIN, that this organization has an agreement with ERIN. So they have access to the management system. Actually, ERIN in particular publishes the list of organizations that have agreement with them, and we verified that this organization is in there. However, some of the RIRs don't immediately put the address space in RPKI. Some of them, it's opt-out, and in particular in ERIN, it is opt-in. So if an organization within the management system of IP does not opt into RPKI, their IP address is not within any of the certificates in the RPKI cryptographic tree that would provide a key to issue certificates such as the ROAs for that address space. And as I'll explain later, usually in this type of situation, we've seen two options. Either the organizer is completely unaware of RPKI and doesn't even know that this exists, or there is a political decision by the organization of just not do RPKI. Independent of that, given how these prefixes are routed, we recommend this whenever that is signed, that address space is in RPKI, this should be the ROAs, given how that prefix and subprefixes are routed. And again, they are organized by origin AS, and here you can see that we're providing the list of prefixes that should be in the, we recommend them being the same ROA, because that way, for example, in this case, that they have different origin, it would only be 2 ROAs, one of the ROAs with a list of prefixes. These would reduce the amount of ROAs that are in the cryptographic tree. And because I'm in the business of analyzing those cryptographic tree, well, this actually has an impact on the amount of time and resources that it consumes to actually validate all these certificates. But we do understand that there are organizations that would rather have one prefix in only one ROA. So if you select this other button, we will provide you the list of doing just one ROA per the different prefixes. Okay, given also based on some feedback, that early feedback we got, we include all the type of prefixes. You can also use this system to figure out, for example, the prefixes that are invalid that you're routing. And here I looked at this one, and you see that one of the information that we provide is the RPKI certificate identifier. And with that key, you can actually go, for example, to Job Snyder system, the RPKI console, and with that key, you can find the certificate. So I went in and I found this certificate. This was a few days ago. This is a certificate that was issued the 1st of January. And you can see that in this certificate, the origin AS is not Cox Communication AS number. And that is why that those routes are invalid. So we believe that this is a coordination issue between Cox Communication and the organization for which they're routing their prefixes. Okay, so I hope that this tool is useful for the community and supports the RPKI adoption for those that have not finished up or are in the process of adopting RPKI. With this data from this data set, other than making it publicly available, we also analyzed it to have a higher level picture that would answer this question of what is the effort that it would take to really get to higher levels of adoption of RPKI. So from there, looking at only the prefix not in RPKI, so that would be our 100%, I'm going to walk you through what we find for the IPv4 prefixes. So from that 100% is about 440,000 prefixes. A little bit more than 20% of that address space is not in RPKI. There's no organization that has a key that can issue RPKI records for that address space. And as you expect, a big part of it used to be legacy space, but most of that space has actually signed agreement with Erin and the other ROAs and could issue address ROAs. So all of this address space that is in here, again, we have these two main reasons. Either the organizer is completely unaware of RPKI, has not clicked in, has no interest of putting their address space in RPKI, don't even know what that is, or there are organizations that have made the decision of simply not adopting RPKI. On the more positive side, we have that about this 80% of the address space is in the RPKI tree, and most of that is actually has no routed subprefix, so it would be relatively easy to issue RPKI, and even has not been reassigned to a different organization. So it's the organization that received the delegation from the RIR, routes that prefix, or the set of prefixes, and has not sub-delegated that to any other organization that would require coordination. Of course, there could be customers and more complicated thing, but that really seems to be the easiest part to adopt RPKI. So we look a little bit further into that 50%. So only 50% of the space left fits in there. And in there, we still have, we separate in two categories. So a big chunk of that 50% ended up being like 30% globally of the address space not in RPKI. That address space is from organizations that have zero history of RPKI. They've never, ever issued a ROA. And turns out that if at this point in time you have never, an organization has never issued a ROA, it's highly likely that here we again have an awareness issue. These are organizations that are not at all aware of RPKI, or again, a political decision of not doing RPKI. And for example, we see a lot of Chinese organization in here because China has taken the position of not doing RPKI or not supporting much of RPKI. So a lot of Chinese organization, the address space that is in APNIC fits in this plus here that there is no RPKI. On the most positive note, so from that 100%, there's actually a 20% that this would be like organizations that have already adopted RPKI, they just need to finish up their adoption, and by those organizations that have already issued ROAs. So we can see that the same key that wouldn't be needed to issue the ROA for address space that is not covered right now has already issued some ROAs. So at least they know how to do it, they've done it before, this is really for organizations to finish adoption. And I looked a little bit more into that, into these numbers, what would be for the Aryan region, given we're here in Nanoq. And of that 20%, about a quarter is address space is actually in Aryan. And looking a little bit deeper into that, I found that it's about 700 organizations, and the top 3 that would actually have an impact if they would finish their RPKI adoption. I found that Level 3, Optimum, and Host Papa, they have already issued some RPKI records, but they're not fully covering all the address space that they have been delegated. And if they would finish their RPKI adoption, it would have actually an impact. Okay, then in the middle, we have these prefixes for which there are reassignment to different organizations, and there are routed subprefixes that then would need definitely a more careful RPKI adoption to prevent having some traffic not reach their destination and make them make destination available using RPKI. So we hope that in this case, a platform such as the one that we have that makes publicly available this data would be helpful. To summarize, from our research, it seems that to really reach higher levels of RPKI, it will require support. So just by waiting, this won't happen. The expectation that now that we've crossed the 50%, that this would be a smooth ride until we hit the full adoption is not real. What we find is that there are many challenges, and if we want to get there, it will require support and effort. And for that, we recommend first that come with creative ways to have new channels and awareness for training and reaching out to organizations that even at this point are completely unaware or don't have any understanding of how to issue the RPKI records. Support the development of more tools for RPKI. This came a lot in the interviews that a lot of operators are having to develop in-house a lot of these tools, and there's no guidance, and that takes more time. So having more software tools to managing RPKI records, having the system for issuing RPKI record be user-friendly, easy to connect, really has an impact on RPKI adoption. And finally, I would like to encourage more community knowledge sharing. Even just for the people that we talk to, how they need to think through RPKI, how they need to think through adopting RPKI. It feels like each of them is reinventing the wheel, and that if you're now in the process of adopting RPKI or think of doing it, you would definitely benefit from talking to organizations that have gone through that journey. And it would be amazing if more of those organizations would share their journey and their decision-making to support the adoption for the ones that have still not finished their process. So if you want to know more about this, I recommend, here there are links to the paper if you hit in the PDF. And also, if you have stories, inside journeys about RPKI adoption, or RPKI in general, or routing security, please reach out. I'd love to hear about that and see what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. That was really informative. It looks like you guys have done a lot of work around this. We've got one question.
Thanks, Cecilia. Jeff Houston, APNIC. You know, this is a lot like DNSSEC. You can sign names as much as you want. If no one validates, you're wasting your time. And so there's two parts to this, and you've measured the easy part. The harder part is to actually understand if anyone actually filters out routes that fail an RPKI validity test. And the country of Chile is a great example of this dichotomy. The easy measurement is you just count ROAs in the routing table. 85% of all the prefixes announced that geolocate into Chile have ROAs. Great. 98.5% of all users in Chile will happily go to routes that are RPKI invalid. Really sad. Is the problem more ROAs? Not really. Is the problem actually trying to understand why most network operators find turning on automatic drop of RPKI invalid routes fiendishly difficult as an operational decision? Automating that to the extent that you have no control, but destinations are going to drop, is too much for many operators. And trying to understand that and measuring it is a far, far more challenging problem than just looking at a routing table and counting ROAs. So I gently suggest that all this is fine, but it kind of misses the big point, that unless you drop this rubbish, nothing's changed. If I can get to somewhere that's bad, the attack is working. And so it's not just the ROAs, you've actually got to do something with them is really the hard part. And for this industry, for many countries and national communities, and the US is not. The US is about 80%. 40% of users or 20% of users in America will get there, but the rest won't. But Chile, it doesn't matter. You can sign all you like, they'll still get taken to places that are invalid. So there's a deeper and harder problem behind this is what I was trying to say. Thank you. So this methodology relies on Google advertising. I do about 35 million sample points a day and cover most countries around the world. I use a large-scale anycast network of both valid and invalid routes, and I check to see if users in that country, through their ISP, can reach places where the only way they can reach it is an invalid RPKI route. So I'm pretty sure when I say 98.5% of Chilean users can get to the bad place, that's true.
Okay, wait. I know I may not be able to change your mind, but I can tell you that I started with the same bias that you started, that the hard part is turning up and validating the routes. When I do the interviews are not only for ROAs, are for all of RPKI adoption. And it really hits or miss when we interview an organization that sometimes the team that we're interviewing, they're telling me, ROAs is the easy part, ROV I don't know how to manage. Then we go the same day, another organization, oh, ROV, super easy. I manage all of that. I make the decision I want. ROAs, oh my God. This is just so challenging because a lot of it is out of my control. So I started with the same thing, thinking, okay, ROV is the difficult. It turns out it depends on the organization. It depends on how the organization manages all the resources and how there's also some part of historical dependencies of what the organization is doing. I do agree with you that measuring ROV is challenging, but there are multiple methodologies out there. And the other thing is, it really matters for ROV that the large transit provider are the ones doing ROV. Whereas for ROAS, we need all the holders of address space to do that. So the set of organizations that need to adopt that part of RPKI is completely different. It's not the same set that needs to do ROAS, that the same set that needs to do ROV. And the impact that one can have on the impact that they can have is completely different. For example, a lot of the small organizations can be hosting state or government websites that if they are compromised, there are really issues. But they're not the ones that are transit. They don't have ASs. They're not the one transiting that. So there really are a lot of difference. And I agree that there's also a very interesting and open problem, which I'm happy to do research on. It's just not the one that is ready.
And I think we can continue this discussion outside of the room because we have another presentation coming up. Thank you, Cecilia. That was really informative.